Hi everyone, Adrian Groenewald here, Me Vision Academy. It's such a privilege to be with you and certainly with my guest today, who's another individual who discovered, or I like to say uncovered his purpose. And before I introduce him, Me Vision Academy is all about helping people uncover their purpose, but then lead through or with that purpose, or lead as a purpose-driven individual, which changes the whole ball game and prosper. So find, lead with or through, and then prosper in the process. We think that's important, whatever prosper means for different people, but it's certainly also financially. So it's wonderful to have with me today Jens Keyter, all the way from the capital city of South Africa. He's a senior psychometrist at Thomas International. And it's great to have you with us, Jens.
Thank you so much for having me as well. It's really a privilege.
Jens, we're going to talk about purpose. Why do you think purpose is important?
So, purpose is important, in my opinion, especially because coming from the psychological background, it contributes value to how engaged a person is in their workspace. So, purpose doesn't necessarily just contribute towards whether a person actually enjoys their work, but it fills meaning in their lives. There's actually quite a few studies that now have been found, especially even Gallup itself as well, where people actually struggle to find work-life balance. And what the previous generations were a lot more inclined to find is where they work to make a means to an end. But others, they have found that it could be a bit more different than newer generations itself as well. They've previously found that they work as if it's their life. But now newer generations are finding that work-life balance, you have used that as a means to end to supply your life itself as well. But the alternative view that we can have about that for purpose is the sake that we don't necessarily view it as just as an opportunity to do something, but what contribution you can have to society itself as well. And it's always an interesting topic that I find what I've also had in a lot of lectures and class discussions itself while I was in my studies quite a while back as well, is that how do you find purpose or meaning in a certain life or certain job that you do itself as well, when it's something that most people would view as insignificant? And it's a very good analogy to use is if you were to do something that a lot of people perceive to be insignificant. Let's say you work like in the hygiene department that you have to clean and supply the organization, where you can rather just, instead of viewing it as I just do this because it makes the place look a lot more pretty and desirable, rather if you're having this mindset of I prevent possible diseases. So it's all about your design and how you view your life and what you contribute itself as well. Outside of the workspace itself as well is viewing what is the big contribution you as an individual have, not necessarily just in the workspace. And that's where I find when you find that actual purpose behind your driven nature of you as a human being, that changes your whole outlook as to why you want to contribute to the workplace or even in the larger society, whether that is for helping people or developing yourself to further in other individuals as a long run as well. So that's why I value purpose as really a big contribution in whether that's personal or work related
So,
as
so,
well.
so you're saying purpose is important. It doesn't necessarily mean if I've discovered my purpose in my work environment that I'm necessarily enjoying my work, but I find meaning in it. I could have an awful boss, you know, and he or she makes my life very miserable. But what I'm doing, I really feel like I have purpose and meaning. So that's an interesting view that you gave us there. I find your background interesting. So for all intents and purposes, I have a theory that when you truly discover your purpose, you actually start leading, or if you're in a so-called leadership position, you lead better, more effectively, more impactfully. Now you have a purely technical job, correct? And yet,
Correct.
yet you have found or uncovered your purpose. So I want to unpack this with you for a minute. Do you think that if you have discovered your purpose, and we'll find out what it is in a moment, that you're also a leader because you've discovered your purpose? Does that raise your profile, even though you're still in the technical expert space? Does it raise you as a person to lead more in your interaction with people, or or not?
It's a very interesting point of view to bring up here as well, is that when you find purpose, you're more likely to be motivated to do what you do itself as well. So here's an interesting take we can have on it. So seeing that I'm more of an expert rather than a leader itself as well. leadership is sometimes a very broadly thrown away term, and it sometimes even is a bit vague. What really does constitute for leading people? And really, I think the biggest difference between that concept and what people just generalize leadership as is that it's just delegating, but it goes beyond that, is empowering people around us. That's really what leadership, we've got a lot of fears of servant leadership, transformational leadership itself as well. But that purpose, if you find that purpose, you find that uniqueness behind what you do or in your life, that constitutes for trying to change other people as well, because now you found a unique reason why you want to do what you do. As in my field itself, although I don't function as a leader, my purpose is I provide feedback people on psychological reports and assessment itself as well. And that's where a lot of times we find development areas for them. So because I found my purpose in what I've done, and I've worked as a counselor as well in the past, is where realizing where you can make a unique contribution. And that's where, just because I've found a way to align myself with my purpose, I'm more motivated to want to learn more. And while learning more, I can bring more knowledge to other individuals as well by impacting them simultaneously.
Then
So,
empowering
not
them.
to make a bit of, say again?
Then empowering them more, as you said, leadership is about empowering people. So you do that when you give them more.
Exactly, exactly. And that's the purpose itself as well, and I'm not going to spoil it with regards to what my purpose is yet, but I think you might be reading between the lines already what I'm alluding to. But if you were to be inclined to find your purpose, it will change your whole outlook of actually being mindful of how you conduct yourself and why you do what you do itself as well. It's not necessarily just a job to make a means to end to survive, but rather you find that unique trait that you have as an individual and bring that alongside your purpose. And you've mentioned the sake of, if you have a manager that maybe isn't necessarily as conducive as you would like it to be, it will most likely prevent you from giving up on your dream or what you want to do, because you're still striving towards that purpose. So you don't necessarily assume, just because I've had one bad situation, I should change my whole career trajectory itself. We still try to align with our purpose. And that is where it really keeps you quite mindful of where I want to go towards, regardless of the environment.
Powerful. It gives you more energy. It gives you more resilience, more discipline. There's so much that comes from discovering a true purpose. So yeah, I mean, let's take you out of your misery. Tell us what your purpose is, and then we can build a picture. And then how did you discover this purpose? But first, what is your purpose, Jens?
Okay, firstly. So my purpose is, and it can be also a bit more vague, but making a meaningful impact for individuals. So firstly, maybe this is quite a common thing as well, but I am religious itself as well. I'm a Christian, and I value making a contribution towards people, whether that's in the workplace or outside. And that doesn't always mean you have to become, let's say, a pastor itself as well, but rather making changes in people's lives. That's where I found myself going into psychology. Although I did jump initially around because I was considering the route of clinical psychology, because I really view that that would be the main focus to achieve that. But as I went on, I developed an understanding of myself that maybe I'm a bit more of a talkative individual, and that might not be the best for being a clinical psychologist. But that's where I rooted more towards industrial psychology. So although I'm not at my final stage where I want to be with my career trajectory, I'm still moving towards what's in line with my purpose. So my purpose is all about making changes for people to better their life, increase their well-being itself. So in line with my field that I'm doing now is changing organizations' perspective of not necessarily just viewing it as we need to make profit and that's the end goal. How do you empower your people to increase their skill sets, their self-efficacy, to want to build and stay with the company as well? And for me, I use it almost as a means to an end to still align with their goals, but actually make a difference for people, making them actually enjoy their job itself as well. Because I know a lot of jobs, people don't really like what they're doing. Gallup studies are finding that satisfaction in our workplace is actually very insignificant. So dissatisfaction is very prominent currently, and that's where I want to really make that contribution. So my purpose has always been towards how can I make a change in a person's perspective and actually help them enjoy what they do in life, whether that's even personal or work related. A lot of time in my discussions as well and feedback, I don't necessarily just keep it work related. I ask them about their personal elements as well, not going into a counselor because obviously my HPC's age rules and regulations prohibits me, but still being able to make that impact. So that's really where my purpose comes from. I think your second question as well is how I found my purpose, if I'm correct.
Correct.
So how I really found my purpose is, and it's a little bit more of a personal element, is when I was younger, I did go through a bit more extreme bullying and situations like that. But rather than trying to play victim itself, I found a unique orientation to see why are people doing what they do. So I had a bit more inquisitive nature to try and understand why do people engage in, let's say, harmful behavior or when it's deviant behavior. And that led me into understanding or wanting to investigate psychology a lot more. And rather than taking, like I mentioned, the victim stance, I orientated towards becoming more resilient and understanding, not using it as a scapegoat, but rather see how can I change potentially someone from going into maladaptive behavior to becoming more sufficient in their life itself as well, whether that's work-related or non-work related. Because I always mention to people, whether your work function is satisfactory or not, your life is still going to spill over to your personal life as well. And we want to make sure the person as a whole is holistically quite sound and mentally stable as well.
Hmm.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So you seem, I don't know your age, but you seem quite young. So you may have discovered your purpose fairly young. A lot of people, it takes them decades, to truly discover their purpose. Do you think your purpose will evolve? Do you think this is like the reason you're on Earth, or do you think chances of it evolving or changing are quite good?
It's a very good question. So I do believe that, like in psychology, they do say personality, for example, is something that remains quite stable. The purpose, I think, you will change to a certain extent, especially if you really feel quite lost. I believe in today's society, there's so many phenomena that people experience that you can't necessarily just have one outlook, like your myopic view, how you view reality itself. But for me, I found that my main core of my purpose of life is what is most likely going to remain stable. Some subdivisions of it might certainly change itself, where I might end up in my career itself as well. But my purpose will always most likely be is making a change for people for their psychological well-being. I can actually relate it to past experiences. I can even refer to what when my parenting years or where I was reared itself as a child. My parents would always say, "You always had the most interesting friends that always seem to have a bit of a struggle," and that really seems to be a consistent trend that happened in my life. I'm always trying to get people that are struggling to prosper more in life itself as well. So it has been something that's quite a consistent trend. I think that's where I've quite easily picked up what my purpose would be. But I wouldn't say necessarily, I think this is probably a question you might ask a bit later, is that it's not completely the challenge of establishing your purpose. Yes, that is a very difficult challenge, but how do you also align your purpose with your life, or how you can make it an impact in your workspace or personal life itself as well? That's really, I think, the biggest challenge. Most people have some form of idea where their purpose lies, but they don't really know how they can align it with their job, because a lot of times we don't find we can get the job opportunities we want or the financial capabilities to study what we need to do to get into that type of field
Mm.
itself. So obviously you might have a different take on that as well, and a lot of people might have different stances on it, but I think my challenge is a lot of times where you also find your alignment with your purpose, not necessarily just the development of your purpose. But I know with working psychometric assessments, a lot of people do lack insights of this of themselves. Self-awareness is sometimes a bit of a challenge, and that is where most likely the meaningful of your purpose or discovery of purpose might be more challenging
Yeah.
as well.
Yes, thank you for that. I mean, we'll certainly explore that more in the future. There's no doubt that finding or uncovering your purpose is a big breakthrough in life. But then aligning it, with what you're doing job-wise or family-wise or, community-wise, it may sometimes require radical steps, but in general, people can probably live their purpose where they are at that moment. But that's a very interesting conversation we'll have sometime. I'd like to end off with just quick tip or advice you would give people in terms of how to uncover their purpose. What would you say?
So the first thing I would say is mindfulness is very important. So it's a very difficult thing, but what I would adventure into is asking people to go and ask those around them that are very close, but you know they can be transparent with you. How do they view you as a person? See how that aligns with your perspective itself as well. Sometimes we can be a bit more deluded of our idea, we perceive ourselves and how it comes across as well. That's the first step I would take. Then uncover what really serves meaning for you. Where have you found that it's the most engaging in certain areas of your life? That generally helps a person align with regards to what is going to contribute towards their purpose. So it's small steps that it's almost uncovering whether it's the final goal, finding the purpose, or how you can align your purpose towards your life itself as well. So that's my takes would really be is asking a bit the outside of world, but also introspect. But a lot of times, if we introspect too much, we get a bit overthinking of our perspective behind a situation as well. So that's where subjective reality is very important, and see how also you come across as an individual, and consider your unique strengths that you have as well, because each person has their own capabilities that can really make a change in this world itself as well. But also, it does depend from your upbringing, what your preferences were, and how your values were in line, because all of these have a unique contribution to how you develop and also define your purpose itself.
Jens, thank you so much for your time. Certainly, we hope the journey doesn't end here with you. And we really appreciate your time. That's Jens Keyter, Senior Psychometrist at Thomas International. Thank you for joining us.